Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Andy Oakley. Today it's the 8th of December 2024. And today I want to talk to you about how in recent years there's been a push in academia and through the Waitangi Tribunal that somehow the natives of New Zealand did not cede sovereignty. Now, I've even heard Professor of History Paul Moon state that the treaty was a vehicle for the British to exercise its jurisdiction over its population living here. In other words, that the natives were somehow a different kind of people and that the law wouldn't apply to them. Stating that the natives of New Zealand were a different kind of human is the definition of racism, and I don't think the Queen of England or the Secretary of State for the Colonies were racists. It was James Busby who wrote the treaty, and he didn't just make it up. Lord Normanby, the Secretary of State for the Colonies, wrote the instructions and they were to be followed explicitly. So let's learn about the instructions and so the intentions of the British government with respect to colonising and eventually governing the islands of New Zealand. The document that I'm about to read is a pivotal piece of New Zealand's colonial history. It details the instructions given by Lord Normanby to Captain William Hobson on August the 14th, 1839. However, the original and difficult to understand Old English text could easily be misinterpreted, and I believe that's what these academics have done. So for the purposes of clarity, I've had Lord Normanby's long-form instructions expertly updated using the power of a large language model, artificial intelligence, to modern day English. Now, the directive by Lord Normanby was instrumental in drafting the Treaty of Waitangi and an agreement that became later central to the relationship between the British Crown and the people living in New Zealand. Now, I want you to notice something of the utmost importance that almost no one is aware of. Just as in the 1835 He Whakaputanga, or Declaration of Independence, the people of New Zealand are not called by the collective noun Maori. Also, the collective noun Maori does not appear in any of the 1835 or 1840 treaty documents. However, in the Treaty of Waitangi Act, the government have ignored those 1840 documents and have used the capitalised noun Maori, which is a convenient mistake that allows treaty claims only for those who state they are Maori, which is actually a political identity and not an actual one. The instructions reflect the British Crown's approach towards colonisation, initially uninterested in colonising New Zealand, but then under increasing pressure from the residents, emphasising ethical considerations and the protection of the native rights amidst the pressures of expanding British influence in the region. So here is the Normanby's instructions in modern English. He starts with, "We've always recognised the significance of New Zealand for the interests of Great Britain in Australia. We're aware of its rich natural resources and its strategic location, which could significantly influence the region in both peace and conflict times. There's probably no better place on earth where colonisation could suffer such promising national benefits. However, the government has been bound by higher ethical considerations from pursuing such an enterprise. We've listened to the advice from the 1836 House of Commons Committee regarding the welfare of Indigenous peoples near colonies, or near our colonies, agreeing that the potential economic and political gains from New Zealand wouldn't justify to harm these people, whose sovereignty and land rights are undisputed and acknowledged by Britain. We still hold those views strongly, though external pressures have forced us to reconsider our approach, albeit with great reluctance. The necessity for government intervention has become too clear to ignore. Recent reports that since early 1838, over 2,000 British subjects have settled permanently in New Zealand. Among them are individuals of questionable character, including escaped convicts and deserters who operate outside any legal framework, leading to rampant crime. Furthermore, there have been substantial land deals with natives, and many have left the UK to farm these lands. This surge in settlement is undeniable, and without governance, the pattern of exploitation and conflict seen elsewhere might repeat here. To prevent these outcomes and to protect both the settlers and the Indigenous population, we've decided to establish a formal civil government in New Zealand. This is the main goal of your mission. We recognise New Zealand as an independent state, albeit in a qualified way, given the nature of its tribal structure. However, this recognition is still a commitment from the British Crown. The Queen, following her predecessor's policy, does not claim New Zealand without the informed consent of its natives, given through their traditional customs. Yet believing that the British governance and protection would serve the natives better than their current precarious sovereignty, we've authorised you to negotiate with them for the Queen's authority over parts or all of New Zealand they agreed to place under British dominion. Your negotiations might face scepticism due to potential perceived threats to their independence. Overcoming these will require patience, justice, and sincerity. You'll have the support of missionaries and long-term British residents who understand the local culture and language. Your selection for this task is based on your integrity and straightforwardness. You must explain clearly why this agreement benefits them and the risks they face without a legal framework. If necessary, you can offer gifts or financial incentives, but you'll need to coordinate with the government on these. The control over land sales is crucial for the sustainable development of any future British colony in New Zealand. Large land acquisitions through gifts or nominal purchases from the natives should be avoided to ensure proper land management and fair distribution. Upon arrival, you will declare that only land transactions sanctioned by the Crown will be recognised. However, you must reassure settlers that their equitable land acquisitions will be respected, while investigating and possibly confirming these through commissions appointed by New South Wales. You'll also need to ensure that the natives aren't deprived of land essentials for their livelihood. An official protector will oversee this. Promoting the civilisation of the Indigenous population involves education, religious instruction, and protecting their customs unless they involve practices like human sacrifice or cannibalism, which must be banned. Regarding governance, New Zealand will initially be dependent on New South Wales for administrative support, although this has its drawbacks. It's the most feasible solution until New Zealand can establish its own legislative authority. New Zealand will not become a penal colony, and the legal framework for the new territory will be discussed with the law officers of the Crown. You've been appointed Lieutenant Governor of this extended part of New South Wales. In your absence or demise, the Acting Governor of New South Wales will appoint a temporary successor. Initial administrative roles like judge, prosecutor, protector of the Aborigines and others will need to be established. But for now, we're keeping these minimal. You will work with Sir George Gipps to determine necessary appointments and their compensation, always with an eye on cost effectiveness. The financial operations in New Zealand will be separate but aligned with those of New South Wales. Initially, you will have access to funds from New South Wales, but you must manage these prudently and plan to become self-sufficient through local taxation. Lastly, many issues will arise that we cannot predict or plan from here. Your judgment, experience and collaboration with Sir George Gipps will be crucial in navigating these challenges. So there it is. That's the AI updated modern English version of Lord Normanby's text. So I want to just summarise the intent to establish a government for all. So, contrary to what many scholars state, Lord Normanby's instructions to Captain Hobson clearly outlined the British intent to establish a government in New Zealand that would serve not just for the British settlers, but for all inhabitants. The recognition of nominal sovereignty. Now, the British acknowledged New Zealand as an independent state in its tribal form, with the Crown's desire to extend government only upon the consent of the natives. This was a testament to the respect for New Zealanders' rights and an acknowledgement of their sovereignty, which was to be negotiated rather than imposed. Protection from the chaos. The document highlights the lawlessness that had begun to pervade New Zealand due to the influx of British settlers, including those of a dubious character. The establishment of a government was seen as necessary to prevent exploitation, protection for both settlers and natives, and to maintain order. We know that there was a period of tribal warfare that had been going on also between 1800 and 1840. Negotiation and consent. Hobson was instructed to negotiate with the separate tribal leaders, explaining the benefits of British governance while respecting their customs and laws. This negotiation was meant to be conducted with sincerity, aiming for an agreement that would be mutually beneficial. And note that the negotiations were with separate tribal leaders, not Maori. Land management. The British intended to regulate land sales to prevent the kind of land speculation and unfair transaction that could disadvantage the natives. This was to ensure substantial development and fair distribution of land, with the Crown acting as mediator. The education and civilization. There was an emphasis on civilizing the natives through education and religious instruction, albeit with a respect for existing customs unless they were deemed inhumane by British standards, and a number of them were. Administrative structure. Initially, New Zealand was to be administrated part of New South Wales, indicating a phased approach towards establishing a fully independent governance structure. This was aimed at providing immediate governance while allowing for eventual development of local legislative authority. Economic self-sufficiency. The financial aspect of New Zealand's governance was to be managed with the aim towards self-sufficiency, indicating a long-term view of integrating New Zealand into the British economic system while maintaining its administrative separation. So the text thus not only outlines the intention to govern, but does so with an explicit aim to integrate and protect all peoples of New Zealand under a single, albeit initially external, influenced government. This approach was to ensure peace, prosperity and justice for all, reflected a nuanced policy of colonisation that sought to balance British interests with the rights and welfare of the native population. And as we now know, this approach was successful. It was so successful that by the year 1900, New Zealand had gone on to be more productive per capita than both the US and Australia. Not only that by the 1950s and 60s, New Zealand led most of the globe, both economically and socially. So the idea by academics that New Zealand, the government was set up just to govern British people doesn't fit with the historical facts. And also the historical facts in terms of our economic success and our social success show that this was done in a most respectful way. And that's the way we need to look at New Zealand moving forward. Forget the wokeness victimhood that's going on. I've been Andy Oakley, and thanks for listening.